Hey friends, Jeff here with a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today we welcome to the show Nigel McCracken. Nigel is the COO at Virax BioLabs, where they're developing a portfolio of diagnostics for indications around chronic inflammation and T-cell exhaustion. Nigel wakes up every morning, as he shares in our conversation, with this passion for helping mankind, helping them to live better lives. And the avenue he's chosen to spend his time on is diagnostic and early indications that will support individuals and their caregivers to help maximize individuals' lives. Who Nigel is to me, as you'll clearly hear in this conversation, is energy and drive. He has an infectious level of energy and drive that has its roots in his earliest days and many years of playing rugby, which we also dive into in our conversation. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Nigel McCracken. Nigel McCracken, welcome to the show. So excited for us to dive in today.
It's nice to be here, Jeff.
Awesome. So I just did a brief introduction of you and who you are to me. I would love for you to start us off and share with the audience what you're up to in the world.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Jeff. And as I say, it's a real pleasure to actually be part of the podcast today. I mean, so just a little bit of what I'm up to at the moment, a little bit of general background, because I know you've sort of given up. I've been sort of doing drug development for the last 30 years. And I've sort of been involved across many different indications, and certainly the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, it's been very focused on infectious disease as well as oncology. And I think, I might have mentioned it before, but I mean, I think, when you're so in the midst of it, and you're trying to develop drugs, to treat specific indications and whatever, what you do realize in a lot of indications, specifically the ones I mentioned, early diagnosis, whether it be a viral syndrome or an infectious disease or cancer, is extremely important. And actually, it's as important is actually having some sort of therapeutic intervention. So where do I find myself now? Well, actually, I've sort of, after 30 years, although I've been involved, in diagnostics, and inadvertently doing the drug development, I've sort of moved more to that diagnostic part, where we're looking to sort of diagnose specific, indications, specifically around sort of post-viral syndromes, as a means to prevent, any long-term sort of, symptoms because of lack of diagnosis sort of thing. And it's quite topical at the moment. Following on from SARS, we have long COVID. Lots of people have been dealing with ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, and I know in the US, people, the symptoms are very similar, even for something like Lyme disease. But again, so where my focus is at the moment is around that early diagnosis of those symptoms associated with, those syndromes.
Mm. I always am curious with such a long track record that you have. You've gotten to this point, and if you're like me, you get to a point where you are very choosy about what you're going to work on. Mm-hmm. So you give up. Again, I don't know your story, but you give up caring what other people think, and you say, I'm just going to do what I want to do. And so I'm wondering why this now at your stage of your career, this early diagnosis.
Yep.
When you made the decision to join Virax, what was it in your mind and heart that said, yeah, this is for me in this stage of my career?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I'll start off with the beginning, and the beginning being I think I've always been a very driven person. Whether I was studying or whether I was playing sport, I was very driven. So, I played a lot of rugby and I just trained all the time. I wasn't 6'4" and, 250 pounds, but basically I just worked and I was driven at being the best I could be. Now, in relation to that, the other thing that I do like, and we'll most probably get on to this, later on in the podcast, is that I love a challenge. And I actually embrace a challenge and doing something different. So although it's slightly different in that I spent the first 3 years being a drug developer, ultimately the science, I love the science. I love the challenge, because when you're trying to understand specific diseases or targets, there's many different aspects to that, how a disease progresses. Now, I'd mentioned to you that certainly in the last 10, 15 years, I've been involved in, infectious disease and oncology. Now, what I can say is about, whether it's a viral infection or whether it's, a cancer and stuff like that, what these two sort of indications do is, whether it's a cancer or an infectious disease, what they do is they sequester different things within your own body to allow it to grow or to replicate. And, so both within those indications, I've been pretty much rooted in trying to understand the interactions with the immune system, whether that's the innate immune system or the adaptive immune system. So although I've moved away from the drug development part of developing a therapeutic, based on a target, trying to understand the target and the disease progression, ultimately, there's so much science involved, with that early diagnosis of post-viral syndromes related to the immune system, whatever, that it just keeps me super interested, because it's hard, it's not simple, and whatever, and there's so many different things that you need to think about, and whatever, but there's a massive need, and that's the thing that drives me.
I am drawn to your reference to your sporting life in rugby, because here in the States on Netflix, we just had the documentary on the Six Nations tournament, which I know is happening right now. And as a non-rugby person, just totally fascinated by that. And I think the term is resilience. That is, as I watched that documentary and watched matches, the resilience, you pointed to challenge, but I'm wondering what rugby and this idea of resilience, this fight and this never give up attitude, even way different than any American sport, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
What's the place that the resilience that was built, or other characteristics of what you learned and grew into as a rugby player, how is that translated into your work, into your leadership?
It's a great question. It's interesting because I started playing rugby when I was, 13 at school. I sort of came into it fairly late. They did play at school. The first game I played, I broke my arm, and I fell in love with it from that day onwards. So the interesting thing about rugby, and you mentioned the Netflix, the Six Nations thing, and you when you look at the thing, it's a very physical game. It's like a little bit like American football, but I guess the difference is it's pretty much the ball's in play all the time, and you're both running around, but you're also, there's that contact one. And now usually what happens is it doesn't come it's not something you're just born with. So when you start rugby, and the whole ethos around the rugby is that is the training. So you train both your body to take the hits, but you also in your training, you're hitting bags. And it's certainly in Scotland, because it rains all the time, you're in mud, you're wet, you're cold. But what your body and what you're trained to do is to get up and hit the next ruck bag, or get up and never let your 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 colleagues, your players down. Now, we all have a position. It's like anything else and whatever, and so what do I take on in that sort of thing? That resilience about not letting people down, about integrity, because although it seems like it's a rough game, there's an awful lot of respect within rugby, and there's things that you just don't do, and whatever, and and you're allowed to, you're even when you're playing rugby, and maybe you have an injury and stuff like that, you don't make too much of a noise about it and whatever, because you're going to upset your other players. I mean, there's only one instance if you fracture your femur, where you're allowed to sort of make noise because that's sore, sort of thing, whatever. But other than that, you've got this team mentality, and you realize that everybody is part of the team. If we were all super, achievers and stuff like that, it wouldn't work and whatever, So everybody has a place, and to get to that Saturday, it takes an awful lot of hard work, and you need to be driven, and you need to be committed. And that's the sort of thing that I've always taken into my work, where you realize that a team itself, or if you're looking to build a team, we've all got different personalities, all different skills. And if we were all the same as me, we wouldn't get anything done, because we're most probably blue sky, inspirational, but you need people to specifically do things. So when you think about building a team, you need to understand yourself and how you are, and what your sort of skill set are, and what you're good at, but also understand, maybe what some of the things that are lacking, and that you complement that sort of thing. And I think that's I have loved every day that I played rugby, and I played for 40 years, sort of thing, or whatever, and I think you miss it, but I think that drive and that teamwork and understanding that just commitment, and not letting something go until you get to finish it, that's certainly something that sometimes, as I've went along, you do meet people who are maybe not that driven, and it can be quite frustrating for them. And we'll most probably talk about, the whole emotional intelligence and stuff like that, because I think you just need to understand, that not everybody's the same as you. And although you might be good at this, you need somebody to complement you, to actually be really effective, both as a group and as a leadership, as a leader, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much there, Nigel. So much there. In the team environment, sporting team environment, there's a coach, and she or he makes no bones about, okay, alignment, mission, and if even for those that have a minor role on the team, they have to bring a certain mindset. Otherwise, you're on the bench or you're not on the team at all. And there's something beautiful and in that meritocracy that just, if I'm honest, doesn't exist in the corporate world. And you pointed to there's a variety of mindsets, there's a variety of drives and motivation. And so where I'm going with this observation is, with the question is, in the modern world, especially with multiple generations and multiple mindsets, and is how do you approach leading in that environment?
Yeah, I you're right, because again, I think in the corporate leadership, if you're a biotech company, you're a CEO, and that qualities of that sort of leader, that out-facing person, whatever, compared to a leader who is leading a group and whatever, is trying to create an environment which is somewhere where people can grow and they enjoy being, and it's effective and it's efficient. It's completely different sort of thing. So to your point, come back to that analogy around the sports sort of thing and the coach and whatever. I think one of the most important things, people need to know where their position and what the plan is. So that transparency about the plan. So again, if you're putting objectives, for a team and stuff like that, you got to show them what where you're going, because you need to bring them along, sort of thing, or whatever, and specifically doing that sort of thing. Whereas maybe, a CEO within, a biotech, who's dealing with, say, investors, who's very outside, the person who's the CEO that you look for may not actually have those great leadership qualities. They might have the experience because they've raised so much and and basically people know them, sort of thing. But as a leader, they might be absolutely terrible because, it's different. And depending on whether it's a biotech, which is usually a smaller group, or whether it's a bigger sort of company, say say Pfizer or something like that, that's got multiple layers, what your leadership within that, because you have teams that specifically do, specific work, and they're usually part of project teams and stuff like that, the leadership is different because the people will require something different from you because they're so far away from, that CEO who's leading the bigger group rather than anything else. So yeah, no, I find it a fascinating thing because, over the years, when I first started out, I was being led, and what you tend to do is you tend to take a lot of, on that journey, you're always learning and you're always acquiring knowledge and you're acquiring sort of, wisdom, as you say, sort of thing, or whatever, that wisdom might, from a scientific point of view, it might be a lot of scientific knowledge, but it'll also be, you'll take the best things out of the leaders that you've worked. Not everybody's good at everything, sort of thing. And I think if you progress and you're looking to form a team, an efficient, functional team, sort of thing, I think you take all of those learnings that you have from either, going through management course and leadership courses and stuff like that, as well as good practices and whatever, as well as something like emotional intelligence, to understand that not everybody thinks the way that you do and whatever, And I know that if I was going to describe myself as a leader, I would say I'm an inspirational leader, sort of thing, or whatever, and that's fine for certain people, but it frustrates other people, or whatever, because other people most probably are a little bit more blue, and they need facts. They don't want to see, innovation all the time and whatever, I think it's okay to have different people within your team, and in fact, it's a good thing, but you just need to understand where they fit and go back to that analogy around the sport and the team and rugby. Each individual will have an individual position where they're really good at doing that, but collectively, there's no I in team, as they say, that. It's a collective sort of, so all of the success that you have as a department or a group is the group itself, sort of thing.
So bring us into a real conversation that you've had recently, however long, month, 2 weeks, whatever, but bring us into a real conversation in your role as leader coach.
Yep.
And where you are drawing out the brilliance, the best of your team and putting them into positions where they themselves can thrive, but also that the team can thrive and excel. Bring us into a recent conversation where that has been a very real conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you've got a group and scientists are working in research is interesting because the scientific rigor of a leader is very important, because most scientists, well, if you start saying things as a scientist, what you'll do, anything that you say, they'll generally shake it, see what falls off, and then they'll put it back together again to make sure that what you're saying actually has value or is actually correct. So you need to apply that. But again, what you're trying to do when you're applying a situation where you're wanting to encourage somebody to do something, to motivate them without telling them, because I don't care who you are, nobody likes to be told what to do. So I think some of the approaches that I sort of take, especially if you're wanting to maybe go with a different strategy, my approach is, of course, at the end of the day, a leader, my responsibility is to make decisions and to with the strategy or whatever you do that. But what I like to do is I like to bring people along in that journey. So I do want to discuss, and as I said, I'm the sort of person, I like to have discussions with people. I like to brainstorm, because ideas from other people and whatever. It's not that I have all of the best ideas. I don't, sort of thing. So most of the meetings that we have when we're sitting down as the research group, and we touched upon this, I guess we're at the sort of the beginning of the journey about, we've just set up the lab, we've equipped the lab, we've set up a new team, of experts and PhDs and whatever, who have got different expertise in, peptide chemistry or immunology or diagnostic development and stuff and things like that. You're forming that team and whatever, and then, as I said, the most important thing for me as a leader is basically to say, hey, look, you've got all of these different skill sets, but this is where the journey that we're going. And this is the reason why we're going here. And this is the value. Now, the thing that's driven me and the thing that gets me up in the morning and why I don't believe I actually have a job is because I'm doing something that I love, because I'm doing something that has value to people, because you're either sort of trying to develop some, drug in some indication to help people, or in this instance, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make this early diagnosis of something like long COVID where there is no diagnosis. So I think if you can bring people along that journey, and that's something we've just done because the group has just been built, the lab has been built, and we're starting on that journey sort of thing. It's super important. People need to be engaged and they need to understand why, why what I'm doing, where does it fit in, and what's the importance of my job, especially, to get the results out here and there, wherever, because this is where we're going. And this is the implication of it. I think that's super, super, important.
Yeah, it strikes me you're a scientist in your formation, at your heart, and like many individuals who have a technical expertise, like in science, it's common to see yourself as the smartest person in the room, as the expert. And what I'm appreciating about what you're talking about is a level of humility as you're building a team to realize being the smartest person in the room is probably not a good idea anymore.
Yeah.
Could you talk about your journey from this mindset of your brilliance, of your expertise, of your knowledge, call it the smartest person in the room, to now developing a sense of humility around, it's actually not a good idea for me to have that seat of smartest person in the room.
Yeah, no, it's great. Now, what I will say is, if you talk to my wife, she will not think that I'm the smartest person in the room. But that was very kind of you to actually mention that sort of thing. But it's interesting. And I was saying to you, I was very driven. When I was, so when I was at school, I wasn't, the smartest person in the class and whatever, but certainly what I was extremely hardworking. So things didn't, I wasn't one of these people that had a photographic memory sort of thing, but, I knew what I wanted and I was very driven. So going back to, so initially I did sort of biochemistry pharmacology at university, and then I did a PhD. Now it's interesting, when I was I remember when I'd got my PhD and I did my first presentation. And I'm sitting in a room and, there's maybe 30 people there sort of thing. And I'm shaking, shaking from the point of view that I'm talking about something that I know about, right? But the only thing I'm worried about is the questions I'm going to get afterwards, because I think that everybody in that audience knows more about it than I do, sort of thing. So as you move on, and I had mentioned to you sort of thing that, I've had a number of sort of, jobs and which has taken me, to working for Abbott in the US, and then, to Switzerland, and over the years, I've worked alongside really, really smart people and whatever, and I really love working with smart people, because I love to feed off, especially when I wasn't innovative in the start, when I first started, because ultimately I was, yes, an expert in this, and it was very, very like that. But knowledge is a funny thing, because, knowledge is only effective when you can apply it, and then you can understand that, okay, there's somebody down the corridor who knows that, and I've got this other problem, and it's bringing that knowledge together. So to the point, and whatever, the reason why I like to surround myself with intelligent people is because the problems that we come up against, whether you're trying to deal with some sort of target in relation to some sort of indication, and you're trying to sort of work out the problems, and you're trying to bring data from lots of different areas to make sense of it. You can't do that yourself, and I think whether you can utilize, AI now sort of thing to bring these data sets together, or whether you speak to people who have got experience and whatever, because they've actually lived it or they've done that thing before, they've maybe, made a mistake here and they've learned from that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that I really, really enjoy. So the humility thing is, I know what I know, right? But more importantly, I know what I don't know. And whatever, and I think the good thing about having a team and whatever, where people bring different skill sets and different sort of experiences to that, it becomes extremely effective. And, and to be able to create an environment which is innovative, especially when you're working in something like translational medicine or translational development, or you're working to try and develop, some sort of diagnostic where you're involving the adaptive immune system, which is super complicated, whatever, you need to do that sort of thing, and whatever, So for me, it's been an absolute pleasure. I would have to say most of the experience and most of the knowledge that I have gained is by doing. It's not by reading a book and whatever, and stuff like that, or it's through interaction with people where you're taking, and I don't mean this in a bad way, as you progress through the years, you will find the person who knows the most about that subject, and you learn from them. It's not that you will be that expert, more an expert than they will, but you'll take that information and then you'll go to the next person, you'll take that, and then you become more rounded as the years go on. And then you can apply the sort of knowledge. It's not that I'm an expert in everything, I'm not, but I understand where that joins up with that and potentially with that. And then you bring the people together, and then in that way you can be innovative.
And you used the word earlier, emotional intelligence, and what you just described, this journey that you've been on and who you've become as a person with EQ, emotional intelligence, to be able to see situations for what they are and have an awareness of people, perspectives, connections, how the dots connect. And the question I have is, could you share where you've gotten it wrong, where you've entered a situation and emotional intelligence took a back seat?
Yeah, there's, as a leader, you're paid to make decisions. And you have more responsibility than a lot of people. And in a lot of instances, you're the one that's sort of driving the strategy and stuff like that. So ultimately, and certainly I know who I am. And it's not to say that I don't learn something more about myself every day. I do. And I find actually that quite invigorating sort of thing, or whatever, And I think I'd mentioned to you before, a couple of years ago, I didn't realize why people had such a problem in understanding me, because, okay, I'm Scottish, but I do speak English, whatever, but whenever whether I was working in the US, or even when I was working in Germany or Switzerland or whatever, people would always they always say, Nigel, I got the first sentence, but yeah, you lost me after that. And it wasn't until, I guess, maybe 4 years ago that I had this coach, this communication coach, a lovely lady, an American lady. And within 2 minutes of me talking, she says, Nigel, you need to inflect down at the end of your sentence. Because when you inflect down, you take a pause and you take a stop. The reason why you don't inflect down, because you're Scottish, and specifically because I'm from Glasgow, you basically inflect up. And when you inflect up, then the sentences all join together, and then people don't understand you. So something like that, you find it a bit about yourself. Now, going back to the emotional intelligence and stuff like that, it's one thing knowing a bit about yourself, but it's also super important to understand the people within your group. And as an example, I remember, when I was working in Switzerland for a company called Debiel Farm, and a group of about 40, people, and it's quite diverse because it was a translational group, but very scientific, experts within specific areas. So what we did is we did one of those sort of charts where we had everybody's picture and we had the personality, who's red, who's yellow, who's, and they were all on there, because then you realize that when you're dealing with somebody who's more blue, and who's very analytical, who wants facts and doesn't want, when I open my mouth, I frustrate them. Or when they open my mouth and they're asking for, can I have this? And they're asking me to dot an I and cross a T, I get frustrated, sort of thing, and whatever. And that's super important to understand, specifically within you when you're in a team sort of situation, sort of thing. So you're right. And now the interesting thing is, as you progress and you age and you get this experience, you get this wisdom, the other thing that you get as you go older is you get this thing of, I know I should do that, but I can't be bothered. So you're always sort of balancing that up and whatever, and it's interesting, when you have leaders who are a lot older, sort of thing about, is there a time where it's maybe time to hand over the reins? Now, I think as a leader, if you do your job properly as a leader, you will develop your team to the point where you're going to do something else because you're going to hand over the reins to them. And that is the natural process of a good leader, because you're going to develop your team and you're going to have, and you'll expand that out. And then when you come to that point, then you'll maybe move on, you'll do something different, sort of thing. Because if you don't, then it's going to be, you're not doing your job properly, sort of thing, or whatever. Now, I think that's the philosophy I've always had, sort of thing, that to develop people and whatever, but there are times, and go back to your original question around emotional intelligence, where as a leader, but you need to make decisions, because by very nature, a lot of people don't want to put their head on the block, as you say, to make specific, and they're not comfortable with that. And that's super important to understand as well. Personality types is one thing, but some people are more comfortable about you just tell them what to do. They like to know what to do. Whereas some people, look, just give me a task and I'll do it. And I think within a team, you just need to understand all of those things.
When you said a minute ago, there's these moments, especially as we get older, when we say, I don't want to be bothered. I know I have to do this. I know I have to have this conversation, but I'm tired. I got other things. I don't want to be bothered. And the word that came to mind that for me, that pushes me through that feeling is stewardship. That while I don't feel like doing that thing or saying that thing, what overrides that is this feeling of stewardship for the place that I am, that I've been entrusted with these people, with this process, with this indication or whatever. And so I'm wondering, this word stewardship, how does that resonate for you, that you've been given this role and this responsibility and to be a good steward for what you've been given? Wondering what that word, how does that resonate for you?
Yeah, I mean, and stewardship's a word. I also use the word integrity. From my point of view, I'm employed to do a job, and I might have this part of the job description responsibilities that's part of that sort of thing, and things that are not captured, sort of thing, that as well. That is my responsibility, and the integrity that I have and whatever, is that, and this in the dry, I'm not, that's That's what I'm paid to do. I will sort of do it. Now, I go back to the rugby analogy sort of thing, where I had a position. I played, number 9, so scrum half, the little general that basically links up the forwards and the backs and stuff, and things like that. Now, I would never, and now my children have a real problem with this, and this is generational thing. I committed to being at training 3 times a week. And it was hard, but I would never not go to training, not just because I'd committed to that, because on a Saturday, if I was a second late and I missed that tackle because I hadn't put the training and stuff like that, I was letting my teammates down. So I take the same sort of thing in there. Of course, there's things that it's only natural, and it doesn't matter whether you're a leader or not. You tend to do the things that you like to do first, and you'll put off the things that you don't want to do, sort of thing. And it's interesting. I remember somebody saying to me, it's not what you're good at, it's what you need. It's it's not what you like to do, it's what you need to do. Which matters specifically as a leader, sort of thing, or whatever. So I always try and keep that in mind, sort of thing, or whatever, because it's like being busy. It's easy. Everybody can be busy, sort of thing, or whatever, and whatever. But it's basically doing what you're supposed to do. And that goes back to the stewardship. It goes back to the integrity about what you're actually employed to do and the responsibilities that you have. Of course, responsibilities to lead a group, but actually in the bigger picture, from responsibilities about developing that, in vitro diagnostic and whatever, for the company and this indication and whatever, and that doesn't leave you, sort of thing. And again, it all goes back to, that drive. And it's interesting, and I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, it's most probably set from when you're 7 years old, that sort of, the drive that people sort of have, if they are driven, whether it's initially in sport, which they then just take in, and then hopefully what happens is some emotional intelligence comes in halfway through and you realize you need to tailor your personality or your drive when you're either speaking to or working with such and such, because it frustrates, and if it frustrates, one of your colleagues or one of your peers and stuff like that, it's not a good thing. What if, and you hope that person that you're interacting with or you're working with has got some sort of same sort of thing. Sometimes you don't, whatever, and there are people who who annoy you and grind you. But I've always had this philosophy, and it maybe goes back to the integrity and stewardship. Be nice to people, or whatever, treat people with respect and whatever, and things like that. And again, it comes into that integrity, especially, as a leader, because it's not just a matter of making decisions. It is bringing people along. It's creating the environment that people want to work in and want to specifically be in, because the reality is, and I might be overemphasizing it. I mean, like the generational thing, it's slightly different, and I'm not saying that my generation, Generation X, got it all right. We were just working all hours of the day, and whatever, that's what was important, because you didn't progress until you did the job for about 2 years before you got the promotion. And you never asked for the promotion. I was not one of these people asked for a promotion. I was one of these people that expected, if I'm doing my job properly, it will come naturally, and whatever, whereas it's slightly different, at least, and it might be my view that, hey, look, I'm at this age, I should be here, sort of thing, or whatever, and I think you just need to sort of tailor that.
That's so good. Nigel, as we wrap our time together, what would you love to highlight about Virax or your work, something that you're passionate about right now? What would you love to highlight for us?
Yeah, no, I sort of said it before. I mean, I think I do love the challenge, but I think, I look at, and I mentioned to you before, something like the adaptive immune system or just your immune system. I've always been fascinated by why do some people, other than taking mutations of the fact, because some people are just extremely unlucky, and that you've got some sort of mutation, from, that's driving some sort of disease and stuff like that. I've always been intrigued to understand why people sort of, maybe, get cancer sort of thing, and say lung cancer, it might be because of passive smoke, or some people maybe because they smoke, maybe they might smoke 80 cigarettes a day and they get nothing, and they live a healthy life and whatever, and I think that interests me and whatever, but the other thing that interests me, and this maybe is one of the reasons why I'm maybe going more towards the early diagnosis or being preventative. I think that we, and when I say we, the collective, we can do an awful lot more to help ourselves, and to help ourselves with respect to, as we get older, of course, as we go older, we're going to have, a lot more problems and stuff and things like that. But I just suspect if we carry on going the way that we do, in that, look, I want to live the life I want to do, and I just want you to give me something to fix it and whatever, because ultimately I just enjoy doing what I do. I don't think society 10, 20 years down the line can deal with it. And working in the life science, I look at, is it sustainable? When I say is it sustainable sort of thing, from a drug development point of view, whatever indication you're in, roughly it's about, unless you're repositioning an old drug, it's between $4 and $5 billion to develop a compound, right? Now, you've only, the way that usually it starts, from the original, patent, you've got 20 years. That's the way it works. And if you're lucky in most of them, it'll take you at least 13 years if you're lucky to get something on the market. So you've got 7 years to try and get your money back, sort of thing, or whatever, So this is most probably the reason why, a lot of these, certainly oncology sort of drugs and stuff, you're talking anything between 40 and 100,000, dollars, to this healthcare system or whatever, Now that's one thing. And again, it's not sustainable, especially from an oncology point of view, when you're taking 4 or 5 drugs at the one time, because they say, 2 is better than 1 and 3 is better than 2, because ultimately you're trying to hit the problem from different things. Now, I don't think it's sustainable and whatever, Now, the other thing is when we think about something like long COVID or any chronic fatigue syndrome and stuff like that, there's certainly in the US, it seems that there's about 20 million people who are sort of dealing with symptoms that are associated with something like long COVID. So, that there's always been these indications as we get older that there's this general, people are dealing with more chronic inflammation type indications. Long COVID, we're getting even more sort of thing. So if you know how the likes of people who have ME or chronic fatigue syndrome is, it's devastating. And it's devastating from the point of view of they have no energy to do anything. So from a societal point of view, whatever, So, and I know I'm sort of chatting about this, but I'm getting to the sort of punchline here is that these post-viral syndromes, whether it be long COVID, ME, Lyme disease, it's problematic and it's going to affect society. So the question is one, can we do something to help ourselves, either with our lifestyle, with our, our diet, to maybe, and I know a lot of people do sort of think about, taking antioxidants and stuff and things like that. Oxidative stress or just general inflammation is not a good thing. It's good when you've got a virus because you need that inflammation and you need that oxidative to kill the virus. But you don't want to have it chronically because it causes problems absolutely everywhere. So, thinking about longevity and thinking about, is there anything that we can do? Is there anything I can do to maybe come up with some sort of diagnostic test or help to inform people that, hey, look, maybe you've got to get some chronic inflammation here. Maybe you should change your sort of lifestyle a little bit, maybe change your diet a little bit, whatever, and you can actually have a better quality of life. And I think we most probably need to take a bit more responsibility ourselves, because I think that we can actually have a bigger of effect on our lives. Again, as we get older, we're going to get certain things, but it's the quality of life that we actually have in between there, sort of thing. And I know that there's a lot of societies that are better than others around that whole longevity thing. And we know, there's blue zones all over the place, in the world where, people are trying to understand the commonalities around that sort of thing, whether it be diet, whether it be, community and whatever. I think we can take a bit more control of that. Now, I just feel at this moment, in this juncture in my life, certainly in looking at these diagnostics and looking to see if we can provide information to people to either help them, with a better journey, or to help with some early intervention of a treatment regimen for that person to prevent it getting to the stage where it becomes chronic. I think that's just, that's the thing that gets me up in the morning now.
So good. Nigel, if folks want to know more about you or your work, where can we send them?
Yeah, so as I said, I work for a company called Virax BioLabs. We've got a website, viraxbiolabs.com. I think from that website, you'll get an idea of, what we're trying to do. It's create these, or try to develop tests for immune profiling, as well as T-cell diagnostics, because we believe that T-cells themselves, which are usually used, to destroy pathogens and viruses and stuff and things that are key to a lot of the symptoms that we actually see. And if there's a way of identifying, some sort of signature, that's associated with potentially some of these symptoms that we see, then it can only be beneficial to the individual, as they sort of journey along that sort of thing. So yeah, please, I like talking to people, as you sort of can imagine, and certainly the website's there, and we look certainly in the future to develop and continue to develop. Initially in long COVID, we want to do, but outside of long COVID, other these post-viral syndromes, that we want to potentially provide these insightful diagnostics that can be, put into that health care journey sort of thing, that people will go, when they go to speak to their general practitioner and stuff like that, because they're not feeling particularly well and whatever, and I think, for me, I think until the day I retire, I think that will keep me going, because I do believe if we can diagnose things early, it will have a big impact, in people's lives, because you don't want to take it too far, because sometimes too far is too far.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nigel. This has been such a fun conversation. Really appreciate you bringing all of you to our time together.
Smash it. Thank you very much, Jeff. And again, thank you very much for the opportunities and to speak with yours as well.